Does it seem like there's more people in town than just a few weeks ago? Is your morning commute becoming a lot more hectic than it used to be? Finally, the crowds return to Lido Key, Florida. This is the first time since the hurricanes that I have seen St Armands Circle completely full. This is usually the way this area would look, but since the hurricanes, businesses have been closed, and visitors to this iconic area of Sarasota have been few and far between. Finally, we're starting to see not only the return of many people to this area, but as you can see, license plates from all over the United States. Now, 2025 was the worst tourist season we ever had for snowbirds, but there is some optimism that the coming spring break season will bring much economical relief to the people who depend on the influx of tourists. During the hurricanes that we had last year, this area was completely inundated with storm surge from the ocean, and that meant that many businesses had to close their doors, sadly, some of them permanently. The area became a massive construction site. It wasn't really beautiful to be here anymore. Many of the iconic businesses that were here had to close their doors forever, meaning that for the most part, what was once a live, busy, and thriving section of Sarasota became a ghost town for a long period. So I'm very happy to announce that at least on this particular day, this was Thursday the 20th, there was enough people here to revitalize a place that had been dead for a long time. There wouldn't be enough time to go over everything that's contributed to this situation. We have to remember that there are years where there are warmer winter temperatures, and it's been actually colder in Florida than it has in Detroit in more than one occasion over the last 2 years. When people come to Florida, they expect warm weather. This year in particular, we had a lot of cold weather attached to windy cold fronts, which means that people were not able to enjoy the beaches during the snowbird season. There were delayed weddings and events from before. People who had plans to have weddings and other events during or after in the aftermath of the hurricanes had to reschedule those events and are now taking place. However, the number itself is insignificant. It really isn't enough to drive an economical change in a city that has suffered greatly from the destruction of hurricanes. One of the main things that attracted people to Sarasota is its world-renowned beaches with clear water. However, water clarity has been a fraction of what it usually is. When the waters look muddy and nasty and the beaches do not look scenic, this area really doesn't look that attractive. Combine that with red tide, dead fish, and the health complications that come from the red tide, and being in the Sarasota area in the last few months has been more undesirable than enjoyable. This has meant that many people have rescheduled their plans or reconsidered travel to other areas. The only thing that can really help stabilize the economy briefly here for a period is the coming spring break season. What has the state of Florida done to ensure that we can get this tourist dollars into our community that we desperately need? Well, they've scared away spring breakers. Now, luckily in Sarasota, local governments here haven't done these stupid rants like other agencies have, scaring away the spring breakers. Here, they understand that possibly the only thing that can save the economy is the influx of tourists, and snowbirds have never been problematic here. It seems that the issue is the type of people your city attracts. For the most part, most spring breakers that we attract here in this area of Florida are people whose grandparents live down here, so many times they don't even have to get hotels. They got places they can stay with family. They're a little bit more educated, a little bit more affluent, a little bit more of a money background. Thus, the Sarasota area just attracts a better crowd of spring breakers. When you look at the spring breakers that Miami Beach and Daytona Beach and other cities attract, it's a much more propense to crime type of spring breaker. So it isn't really that the spring breakers are a problem, because we have spring breakers here and they're never problematic. It's the type of spring breakers your particular city in Florida attracts. As I was putting up my camera to head out to do today's video, you can see people on the left walking away and this red car pulling in. Now, the people in the red car nearly ran over the pedestrians that are walking away. The pedestrians screamed at the person in the red car, calling them dangerous in Spanish. Now, I don't know if the people in the red car were Spanish or if the pedestrians only spoke Spanish, but regardless, the people that were walking walked back to the red car, and they had an altercation of some sort where the pedestrians were screaming at the red car in Spanish. that they were dangerous and that they were going to hurt somebody. Now, if you ask me, there's a red truck there, so there's no way they could have really seen them. It's a small car between two large vehicles. As we drove away from South Lido Beach, one of my favorite beaches in Florida, we would encounter these pedestrians ourselves. Now, further ahead, you'll see exactly the type of people you're dealing with. These old people here are really unbearable. I'm not going to lie, we have to deal with some pretty snobby people along the coast of Florida. They're entitled and they only seem to see their side of the story. So earlier on, they almost got hit by that red vehicle. Now they're walking down the middle of the freaking road. I had to wait and let them walk out of the way because they apparently were too entitled to move the crap out of the road. So it seems like you got a lot of people like this who just seem to impose themselves on everybody they can, completely oblivious to their surroundings. There's no shortage of snobby and entitled people in the Sarasota area. Now, just ahead of us is an area that the storm surge rushed in through, and it left many areas submerged in several feet of sand. We had two hurricanes back to back. The streets here were lined with the debris from the first hurricane by the time the second hurricane came, which means that everything that people had put out floated away into the mangroves, creating one of the most destructive aftermaths of any hurricane I have ever seen. To this day, there are still a few businesses here on South Lido that you can tell are still under sand. Up ahead on the left is a building that has about a 12-foot pile of sand out front. So there are still businesses that haven't fully been able to clean up from the hurricanes. You can see there's a lot of landscaping crews out here and people working, trying to get this area back to what it should be. But to be honest, compared to what it normally looks like, it still looks like a ghost town. Entire resorts like this one on the left that were busy many years back today are still nothing more than a construction site with a long way to go. Up ahead on the left, you'll see a parking garage that had about 4 to 6 foot of sand inside of it. The area is still covered in sand. They've started opening it up. Point being that there are still many businesses who have not been able to recover from these hurricanes. Many of the larger resorts and larger buildings are back to functioning. So if you're coming to the Sarasota area now, most likely you're going to have to stay in one of these larger hotels because the smaller little affordable areas are still damaged from the hurricane. Some of them haven't even finished the cleanup, let alone remodeling their hotels. So South Lido Key looks practically like a ghost town. Most of the cars that you see here are not tourists. These are people who are working in construction sites, either rebuilding or in new construction sites that are going up. There are still quite a few large projects going into the Sarasota area, like this building here on the left. Of course, most of the people working in these buildings are undocumented. However, most people trying to rebuild their homes or small businesses are not able to use undocumented workers. It seems that only the larger projects somehow have the blessing from the local authorities to get away with having hundreds of undocumented people on these construction sites. Now, many years back, hurricane cleanup was a matter of 6 to 9 months. That's the way it was with Irma, and that's the way it's been with just about every hurricane in Florida. But with the current situation in Florida and immigration laws, literally, we're talking projects that would have been done in 6 to 9 months to get everything back to normal are now taking years. At least in Fort Myers Beach, for example, they're looking at years to recover. This is just the new face of Florida, where things take a lot longer than they used to because this is the way things are now. This is the way people want things to be. So, of course, if you're traveling to this area, it still looks like a hurricane hit yesterday in some of these places. Of course, the big industries are able to use as many workers as they want, and they're busy building the new resorts that are coming in, but everybody else is pretty much left with very few options to revitalize their properties and get everything back to normal. Now, to be fair, finding a parking spot here should be literally impossible this time of year. It was the first day that it wasn't windy. It warmed up enough to where you could go for a swim. My wife, Katie, went in the water and she swam, so this should have been the type of day where finding a parking spot would be practically impossible. However, it wasn't the case. You can see that for being the beautiful, nice day that it was, there just weren't enough people out here. And that's very strange for this area to still be this empty when things are finally starting to look bright. Now, this was our first beach day that we've had since the hurricanes, where me and Katie have been able to grab all our gear and spend the day on the beach. And we were not ready for it. I've been in pain and agony ever since. I had to drag my cart on the sand. Now, when we arrived to the beach, it was low tide, and it wasn't a problem because the sand was nice and firm, and I was able to drag my cart for like half a mile, if not more. But the tide rose, and when the tide rose, the sand became swampy and boggy, and I had to drag all our stuff all the way back to the vehicle, more than half a mile, and my arms hurt, my back hurts. I was literally in agony yesterday when I got home. We were planning to spend a lot longer on the beach, but we were there for just a brief period of time. By 2 o'clock, we were already packing it up and heading back out. I did some metal detecting. I found practically nothing of value. I did some fishing. I had one really good bite that got away. I was able to cast net 3 bait fish, and the cast netting was for hours trying to get bait fish. We were out there from like 9 in the morning. I just couldn't get any bait fish, so I was cast netting quite a bit, and my back still hasn't recovered fully, so I really kind of did hurt myself in a lot of ways. I was in pain and agony yesterday, and today I can barely move. So it was good that I went to the beach, but I probably did more than I should have. Usually the water in Sarasota is beautiful and transparent. We have had a lot of windy days, so it's probably going to take a while for the waters here to get beautiful the way they're supposed to look. A little bit of the colors coming back, but it just isn't really exactly the way it's supposed to be. This is usually the color you get right up around Venice, Florida, so it isn't the worst possible situation, but there is still a long room for improvement when it comes to the color of the water. I had a great time on the beach. I did go fishing like I said, and I lost the bite of a lifetime. I think it could have been a jack or a bluefish. I had a little mohara on there, the only mohara that I caught all day while cast netting, and these are probably my favorite go-to bait. Now that mohara got hit hard, and I wasn't able to make the hook set. After that, I ran into 2 pinfish. Pinfish are not my favorite bait. I did have somebody steal one of the pinfish. The other one was released back alive. It wasn't even good enough to put on a hook because the bite wasn't that great. At least there was some type of action while fishing, and that's good to know. We've had a lot of red tide. There really wasn't too much in the water. I probably spent a good hour and a half cast netting trying to get bait fish, and all I got were 3 fish. So the biomass out here is practically nothing. There just aren't any fish left. After all the red tide events that we've had, there seems to be like nothing left in the water. It's kind of becoming a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico where there just isn't as much fish as there should be. So we went to the beach. We were tired. I was hurt. My back was in absolute agony. I didn't expect that the ride back would be so difficult on my back. So this is kind of disappointing because, you know, when I was on the beach, I was feeling great. But then when I got back, I was just in pain and agony. I decided we wanted some good Cuban food. Now, Sarasota doesn't have that many great options. The Columbia restaurant is the go-to for tourists on St Armands Circle. I don't go there. That's for tourists. I was born in Cuba. I'm a real Cuban. I'm not eating touristy food. Now, Myrna's used to be way to the left of us in the north side of Sarasota. Their parking lot was small. They really had great food, but it was hard to find parking. And literally the little store next door was practically a trap spot. So it was definitely a hole-in-the-wall place with very limited parking and in a shopping plaza that had a lot of crime. It wasn't really attractive, and the building was kind of old and decrepit. Myrna's recently opened a new location on US 41. That's where we were heading now. I know their food is good. It was just all the issues that I mentioned that made going there kind of unattractive. They closed down that location up there, thankfully, and their new location is busy. Now, we didn't even know they were open because they weren't answering the phone. We were heading to another great Cuban restaurant called Mi Havana in South Bradenton. Now, this restaurant, again, is hole in the wall, but their food is on point. It's really sad that these Cuban restaurants that have the best food sometimes are in the worst neighborhoods and have the worst locations. Myrna opening up this location in Sarasota and instantly being packed goes to show that if they had a good location, these restaurants would have no trouble staying busy with tourists. Go figure, they just opened, they haven't even answered the phone, and already they're packed. Here's the new location. They have outdoor seating and indoor seating. Now, parking is still a little tight here. Keep in mind, you're still kind of in a busy area of Sarasota, so if you got a big vehicle like me, parking is still a little tight, but we were able to find a parking spot. Now, this is 2 o'clock on a Thursday, and literally they were super busy. Both their indoor sitting and their outdoor sitting was just about full. Employees were busy. So their new restaurant location that is larger, more open, and just a better location is packed now. As expected, the food was great and it was really affordable. We had a great time eating here. The food was amazing. I had a Cuban mango milkshake. I had congri, which is a type of Cuban rice. There's Katie right there. I had to pull out for her to be able to get into the parking spot because literally you can see parking is still pretty tight, so I had to pull out for her. By the way, she has lost 72 pounds since she started her weight loss journey. You can check her out on Katie's channel for updates on her. You can find the link to her channel on the main page of our channel, as well as a few other channels that I have that are currently not getting uploads. I'm so busy on this channel, I ignore my other channels like the Racing Pigeon Club, which even though it has 50,000 subscribers, I just don't have time to pay attention to it. We're heading north now on US 41, and the obvious thing is there's literally nobody on the roads. And this is the corridor between the airport, Sarasota, and Bradenton, US 41. This should be a busy and packed area. And as you can see, there's literally nobody here. But there are a lot of people on St Armands Circle? Yeah, so what's happening now, it's kind of weird. Some areas, like those areas that are used by the locals, are really busy because, it's spring and the locals are out doing stuff, but the touristy areas are empty. So I know it's a little confusing. So for example, Bradenton is mostly locals. During spring break, Bradenton is a madhouse along the beaches. Everything is packed. Sarasota is a more touristy city, so right now it's empty. So you have to understand that some areas over here are completely dead while other areas are a complete nightmare. So it's very regional because some areas are for locals and some areas are for tourists. And right now the locals are starting to enjoy the beaches again, but the tourists are not here. And this is somewhat of a confusing scenario because some areas are literally gridlock bumper to bumper, and other areas like this are complete ghost towns. You would think that driving along US 41 between Sarasota and Bradenton, that the city would practically be empty. But keep in mind that this is a tourist corridor and we simply don't have any tourists in the house right now. So as I'm heading back to Lakewood Ranch, I decided to go on University because Highway 70 is a nightmare. Now by the airport, it looks kind of dead. You would think, okay, there's not a lot of traffic in the city, but once we got later on University, you'll see it really became an absolute nightmare. It actually became absolutely frustrating driving on University. So right now it's a little weird. Like I said, it's like some areas look like they're super busy and people are complaining about traffic, but other areas of the cities are empty. And this is where a lot of people always disagree with me because maybe the areas that they are doing everyday stuff in are super busy and super packed, but the areas where tourism exists are empty. Some people are just kind of stuck in their own shell and they don't realize that some areas are super busy while some areas are kind of dead. And that's why you see people that they want to argue with me on the videos. They're like, oh my gosh, it is so busy, it's so horrible where I'm at. So eventually, as we're heading east on University towards Interstate 75, it really became an aggravation as expected. But this aggravation is people, that live here. It isn't tourists. So that's kind of where a lot of people are always calling me a liar on my channel, saying that things are really busy. Yes, it may be busy in your part of town, but if you drive through the entire city and see the whole area, there are some places that are completely dead. Now this is still before 3:30 and we were literally crawling on University. So imagine 4, 5, 6 o'clock how bad things got. I do want to mention that earlier in the day, I woke up around 5 in the morning and headed out to Uber, and I was only able to get 2 passengers in the morning, making less than $19. Now in the morning, the rush hour commute was as bad as it's ever been. It was literally bumper to bumper crawling on Interstate 75. Despite that, Uber is mostly people who are vacationing, drinking, or whatever the situation may be. While the locals were bumper to bumper and the area seemed really busy in the morning, I can usually get a ride from Lakewood Ranch where I live to the airport within the first 3 to 5 minutes. I waited nearly half an hour in the morning to get an Uber passenger and they were going to Palmetto. The only reason I accepted the ride is because the person was literally in the same parking lot where I was at. That should just let you know that right now things are not looking good. Yeah, there's people on St Armands Circle. Yeah, if you're commuting around 4 o'clock, it's a mess. But that's just the local people getting back and forth from work. That doesn't mean that the economy is doing great. Now, I wasn't planning on having a beach day. I went out to Uber drive and it was so bad that I came back to the house and told Katie, hey, you know what? We might as well just go to the beach because I had planned the whole day out like if I was going to go to work. And literally, there were no Uber rides. I was out there for an hour and a half and I made less than $20 with only two passengers during the entire morning. What's weird about that scenario is that 2 days before, I went on an Uber and I made $100 in less than 3 hours. It's really weird right now. There's days where it's completely busy, there's days where it's completely dead, and there's no real logic or rhyme to it. It's just completely random. Look, it's good that there's finally people back on Lido Key, but it seems like we're just getting a little sporadic burst of people in and out of the areas. Maybe because the weather, maybe because the sky's finally blue, but it isn't really a persistent, strong, and dependable influx of people. Things are overall looking really weak. Every once in a while, we get a little seemingly vain little piece of hope, like going to St Armands Circle and seeing cars there, and you think, wow, things are going back to normal, but it's just a very sporadic thing. It really isn't the long-term recovery that we need in our area. Overall, it is actually looking pretty sad. Now with spring break coming into play, warmer weather, of course, more people are going to head to the beaches, and that's going to create a lot more congestion along those heavy routes. But overall, we can assume that mostly things are not looking too good in Florida, and what we're seeing is just sporadic little bursts of people doing stuff, not really a long-term recovery. This is probably going to be the worst off-season we've ever had in Florida, and the economy on a national level seems to be taking a decline. So you better buckle up for a rough ride here in Florida's off-season if you depend on tourism, because things are getting worse than they've ever been. We'll stay optimistic about spring break and what it could bring for us, but the first beach day of the year has worn me out to the point where I'm still in pain today. I'm not as healthy as I think I was, and well, you guys know I had an accident a few years ago, or a year and a half, whatever crap it was. I'm just not in the prime of my health right now, but I do want to get out there and enjoy the off season. Instead of lamenting about the fact that there isn't that much money to be made, more free time available means I should be able to enjoy the beaches more thoroughly. But if my health continues to be the way it is right now, it's questionable how much I'll really be able to do, since the first beach day of 2025 wore me out more than I knew would be possible.